Hello, and welcome to my presentation about data intelligence for Adobe Experience Manager. How to use data metadata to improve the customer experience. What will we talk about today? After a short introduction of myself and my company, Parson, I will give a short recap about metadata in general. What is metadata and why should you care? Why is metadata important? Then we will have a look at metadata in AEM. Where do you encounter metadata? What kind of metadata is available in AEM by default? How can you use and manage metadata in AEM? After that, will have a closer look at data metadata in AEM in particular. And finally, we will look beyond data, how you can consolidate metadata from different content sources by using an international metadata standard like IIRDS. Let's start with the introduction. My name is Ralf. I have been working as a technical consultant for Parson since 2014. My main focus is on information architecture, metadata modeling, the optimization of documentation workflows, and data authoring environments. My team and I created several sets of data example content for AEM guides, the component formerly called XML Documentation for Adobe Experience Manager. We did this to test and develop advanced data features for AEM. My company Parson is a small technical consulting company. Parson was founded in 2006. It is based in Hamburg in the northern part of Germany. We are experts for all aspects of technical communication and provide documentation, consulting services, development, and also training. Parson is one of the leading providers of solutions for smart content and intelligent information, and we also offer sustainable strategies for the digitalization of content processes. Parson believes in the power of open standards and is therefore one of the leading data ambassadors in Europe. And we were also founding members and contributor to IRRDS, the international standard for intelligent information request and delivery. Let's talk about metadata. Why metadata? What is metadata and why should you care? Simply put, metadata is data about data. Metadata provides additional information about your content, and metadata can provide the underlying semantics for your content. In most of the cases, metadata is invisible, but that does not mean that it is not important, and we will see later on why this is so. Metadata can be part of the content itself. That is the case, for example, with DITA, or the metadata can be stored separately from the content, for example, in a CCMS like AEM. Here's an example with extensive DITA metadata. This is a machinery task with metadata elements from the DITA task requirements domain that describe how to connect the stepper motor of a gantry robot. So here's some of the metadata from this DITA document, the required conditions that must be fulfilled before you can start the task, what support equipment is required for this task, which tools do you need, then the required personnel, how many people do you need to perform the task, what is their skill level, and what is the estimated time to perform this task. For example, are there any supplies needed for this task? So you see, there's quite a lot of metadata in this topic. And why is this important? Well, Without the underlying metadata and the underlying semantics, the content can become completely meaningless. If you render just the content without the metadata, you see only a list of the seemingly unrelated items, and you cannot really figure out what each of these items means. So better use and display the metadata of such a topic. In addition to this basic and fundamental function of metadata, which is the providing of important semantics, there are of course other uses of metadata. One very important one is that metadata can be used for search facets and filtering. And metadata can help you to provide targeted information to your users. In this case, the expanded DITA metadata allows version presentation of content either by the audience or product, for example. So now let's look at metadata, how you encounter it in AEM and how it is handled in AEM. If the first thing you'll notice is that metadata in AEM comes under a number of different names. Depending on the context, it is called metadata, it can be called properties. You will encounter tags, predicates, and sometimes it's also talk about whole complete taxonomies. But basically, it always means data about data. So let's have a look where you encounter metadata when you work in AEM. The first thing is in the asset view. The asset view provides a number of metadata presented as a number of separated tabs. And you can see that's really a lot of metadata AEM already provides out of the box. This can be simple metadata, basic metadata like the title of an asset, or more complex metadata like camera data when the asset, for example, is a photo. You use this metadata in AEM when searching for assets. In that case, the metadata provides facets for filtering and for focusing your search and filtering the search results. There's a special kind of metadata available in AEM. It's called tags. Tags are part of the metadata set in the asset view. And they they can be used for search filters as well, and they also provide a mechanism for AEM to deliver targeted content to your audiences. Here's an example how to use tags as search filters as seen by the end user. So now that we have seen how metadata is used in AEM, let's look at how to manage that metadata in AEM. The first thing is the so-called metadata schemas. You can use these metadata schemas to define the interface to manage asset metadata. You can either modify existing metadata schemas or you can create metadata schemas from scratch in AEM. To this end, there's a special metadata schema form editor where you can create a schema with separate tabs, and you have the option to add a number of fields to each of these tabs, and each field is mapped to a metadata or a property available in AEM under the hood. To apply metadata to your content or to create different metadata sets for different kinds of content, content, there's another mechanism available in AEM. It's called metadata profiles. Metadata profiles allow you to apply different metadata sets to your assets. For example, camera data is only relevant for photos, but not for DITA files. And you can use these metadata profiles to automatically set default values to all assets in a folder. And the applied metadata profile for a given folder is shown in the asset view as well. We've already seen that metadata is used as facets for the asset search, and you can configure that as well in AEM. You can define and modify the search forms available in AEM with a special search forms editor. You do so similar to the metadata schemas by adding fields to the search forms and mapping those fields to property settings and properties available in AEM. For each property setting, you see this on the right side here, there are additional settings depending on how you want the search to behave. We've already looked at tagging, how it is used, and in AEM, let's have a look at how tagging is managed and defined in the back end of AEM. You have the possibility to define your own taxonomies as hierarchical tags in AEM. When doing so, the first level is treated as a namespace, and then you can add as many hierarchical levels to your tags as you like. Tags are actually the easiest way to define your own set of metadata in AEM because they can be configured in the back end, while other enhancements and additions to the metadata mechanisms require more complex configuration or even development effort. We will see that later on when we're talking about DITA metadata in AEM. So under the hood, you will notice that tags are also stored differently or separately from other metadata in AEM. Okay, so now let's switch to specifically DITA metadata in AEM. Let's have a look how DITA metadata is managed in AEM. We at Parson have created a set of DITA sample files to test and develop advanced DITA features for AEM. Here are some of these samples. There are 3 sample files for 3 industries. This is for the machinery industry, sample of an electro-pneumatic gantry robot. There's a lot of technical details in there. Then we created a user manual for a fictional smart security software. And finally, from the finance industry, a sample for a car insurance knowledge base. So when we look at the way metadata is encoded and presented in DITA files, there's a number of options available. One is, for example, that you can add profiling attributes in a DITA map. This is metadata that can be used, for example, for filtering and the output and provide targeted information to your users. And there's, of course, also the possibility to add metadata to DITA topics. The metadata topic, data topic can have additional metadata that you might want to use as information in AEM, but that will depend on your use case. So let's have a look at a bit more complex data metadata example, because metadata data file can contain a lot of metadata. For example, this example from the software documentation, we have the change history, we have some copyright information, we have information about the creation and modification dates, and we have additional product information provided as metadata in the data map. So what you have to do is you have to decide which of all these metadata elements you actually need and want to use within AEM. Let's look at an example, because some of the metadata is probably not needed at all, so you can ignore it. Some metadata might be better handled by AEM itself, because there's already a similar metadata mechanism available there. But on the other hand, there might be useful information in the data files themselves that you want to make available to the user for enhancing the user experience. Okay, let's look at the example. In this case, the creation and modification dates probably could better be handled by AEM, because there's already a lot of as metadata available that tracks modification dates and creation dates in the workflow. So this probably is a candidate to not use directly and from the data file. But on the other hand, the supported platforms, as they are provided in the product information, could be very useful search facets. So this might be metadata from the data content that you would like to expose to the users of AEM. When you look under the hood, you will notice that data metadata in AEM is stored and treated separately from other metadata in AEM. So each item in the AEM system has two nodes, one for data meta and one for the other metadata information available in AEM. And what's really important is that the data metadata is not available by default, but requires prior customization to make it actually available to your users. That's of course because all the metadata that is available in a data file, as we have seen, might not be really useful for you. So this must be decided on a case by case, and you have to customize your AEM instance accordingly. To make data metadata available in AEM requires a mechanism that is called extraction, and we will have a look at that. There's a data metadata extraction options available from the back end, but this requires some prior configuration. The extracting data metadata is called serialization under the hood, and the serialization must be configured by modifying a special XML configuration file. In that file, you can define XPath rules that target the desired data elements and attributes that should be extracted from the data content. And after you've done so, you could go back in the backend to the data metadata extraction feature and apply the extraction rules to selected files and folders. But that is still not enough to actually work with the extracted metadata. Data metadata, the data metadata is then available in the backend or under the hood of the AEM system. But to actually use this, you must add another configuration step by adding the desired extracted metadata that should be available as properties in another configuration file called metadata list. That's also available in CRXD Lite. And after you've done so, after you've added the extracted metadata elements to this list, the extracted metadata becomes actually available to be used in AEM, and you can pass this metadata as properties to the DITA Open Toolkit for generating the output. So the metadata that's available in the DITA files will be passed to the Open Toolkit, and you can, or you must, or you can configure the Open Toolkit output accordingly to make use of these extracted metadata. So AEM provides another mechanism to make DITA data and DITA metadata available in AEM. It's also something that must be configured by modifying an XML file. It's a different kind of XML file in this case. With modifying this XML file, you can actually map elements and attributes of the data content to AEM components in the system. And those components are the structural elements that constitute the content of the pages that are authored. So this is a mechanism which is very powerful because you can make, depending on your content and metadata model, you can make any element and attribute that is available in your data files usable in AEM for creating the output. So what you do is you can just add entries for mapping data elements and attributes in this XML configuration file, and they can then be applied to your content to create AEM components from this. So we have now talked about some mechanisms to extract data content to AEM. And we've talked about how you have to consider beforehand which metadata you actually want to expose to your users for and for further processing in AEM. Probably you will not only have consistent content from data sources in your AEM system, but also from other content or content from other sources as well. And when you do that, when you combine content from different sources, you probably will stumble across a problem that the metadata won't fit. So you will have to somehow consolidate the metadata from different sources as well. So we will have a short look beyond DITA, what you have to do and what you must consider when consolidating metadata from different sources. Because what's the problem? When combining metadata from different content sources, the following problem might occur. Well, you have metadata with the same meaning, but completely different labels for the metadata. For example, that's a sample from our DITA files. And the very same metadata content could be encoded quite differently, but basically the meaning is the same. So how do you represent this in AEM without running into problems with two kinds of metadata, two sets of metadata that basically mean the same but look completely different? The solution is you should use a standard for modeling your metadata. And a good standard for this purpose is IIRDS, the International Standard for Intelligent Information Request and Delivery. Parson is a member of the consortium that develops IIRDS, and it's an international standard that for the interchange of metadata for technical documentation, and as such provides a very robust model for modeling your metadata so that you can consolidate metadata from different sources and have a unified metadata model in AEM. Let's look at an example for that. You have these metadata with a same meaning but different labels. And if you look how these the content of this metadata is modeled in IRDS, you could use these IRDS metadata classes, as they are called, to consolidate your metadata. So you would use the role, you would describe the skill level, and the putting to use class. That be role and skill level and putting to use. And that way, modeling your metadata according to such a standard will make it much easier to integrate and consolidate your content from different sources in AEM and make your metadata model much more robust. Okay, so we're nearly finished. Let's wrap it up. What we've looked at today, we have looked at AEM as a very powerful data content management system that can also extract and make the data metadata data available so that you can combine data content with other types of content by means of a unified metadata model. We've looked a bit closer to some of the metadata related features in AEM, how they are used, how they can be managed and configured. And we have seen that by using data metadata, you can use the intelligence that is inherent in the data content itself, can be used to make your content much smarter. And finally, we have had a look how you can make your AEM metadata much more robust by using a standard-based metadata model like IRDS. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, just drop me a line.